Hi everybody, and welcome to our class in intermediate glass bead making. My name is Jeri Warhaftig. I'm the instructor for this class, and I have been working with a wonderful group of 9 students here at the Corning Studio, which is like glass heaven for people who love glass. And this group of 9 students of somewhat varying levels is being introduced to a wide range of techniques, old and new, so that they can experiment with them, make them their own, and build them into their own glass practice. Part of what I spoke about in a talk I gave last night was the need to know where we've been in order to know where we can go. And some of this class has examined techniques that were developed in earlier years and maybe have fallen out of notice or gone by the wayside for one reason or another. We're going to start with a bead that uses copper leaf and enamel. Normally, good studio practice, you want good ventilation. We have that here, of course. But if I was using enamel at home, I would be wearing a dust mask. I would be worried about enamel containment, but this is one little demo. And we won't have any airborne enamel. I'm not sifting in this demonstration, although at home I probably would sift on my enamel. What we're going to do is focus on the reaction between copper leaf and enamel, and we are also going to have a little shot at threading on glass. The reason I chose this bead is because it was first introduced to me, probably not invented, but introduced to me by somebody named John Winters, and John passed away this past year. And so I think it's a nice nod to him to be making a bead in his style, which is what these are. And they can see this on camera, right? These little samples. Sort of revisit John's memory, enjoy the fact that he was funny as all heck, that we have the same initials, JW, which we enjoyed. And this technique has actually been used by many, 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 many bead makers in the intervening years. When I used it the most, I actually used it in my body of work on hollow beads. But right now we're gonna make a tube. And the reason I'm making the tube is because we have been talking in this class about shaping glass. Let's get some glass, that would help. About shaping glass and shaping tubes by cones, right? All got this, guys. You can do this. What I'm going to do is show you sort of an introductory way to making the tube. There's many ways. I always like to remind people there's more than one way to skin a cat here, as the expression goes. But what I'm going to do is show you a beginner's way to approach a tube and avoid the tendency that glass has to pull in toward the center of the bead. The glass is always desperate to be round, and the tube is stuck on the bead release, as you know. And so then when it tries to get round, you get those little pointy ends on your bead, which are not good for aesthetics. They're not good for stringing. They can really undermine the quality of a bead. So instead, as we've discussed, we can start with very small spacers. Now, I've preheated the bead release so my glass will stick. I'm using a white glass that is very soupy, but white works really nicely for this technique. And I have already reviewed with you, and this is just by way of reminder, right? I've got to gather on the end of my glass rod. I'm coming through the flame onto the mandrel below the flame, and the mandrel is just rolling gently away from me as I add the glass. The purpose of doing these 2 spacers like this, the fact that one's fat, one's thin, none of that matters. This establishes the footprint of your tube bead. And ideally, you're not going to reheat those ends again at all, or very little, if at all. And now, by keeping them both warm but not molten, I can know that I have lovely little holes on the end of my bead, and they will stay there. The other trick, as I smush, that's a technical term. What did I use yesterday? I said gush. So gush, smush, either one will work. As I get some white in between these two spacers, I will tell you that the real trick to this technique, oh, my bead release wasn't very hot. If you have bubbles coming up in your glass, it is coming up likely, if it isn't from how you applied it, it's coming up from the bead release. It means you didn't preheat your bead release adequately, so I'll just behave and get it a little hotter. Shouldn't happen now. But as I fill in, one of the things you will notice is that my bead is wider than the width of this flame. This is a mega minor torch, and it has a pretty nice wide zone of heat, which I enjoy. But because I put the ends further than the width of the flame, when I work on the interior of this bead, the center 9/10, all but those end spots, I can use as much heat as I want. It will not gather up into a pointy football shape because those ends are adhered to the bead release. Now, if you get the whole thing hot, then you do run into the problem that I discussed, where the ends will ball up. So what I'm doing to add glass now is I'm just using my eyes, I'm making gathers, and I'm saying, where is this bead too thin? And I can add glass, and I'm using those two end spacers to assure me that I am going to have an equal depth all the way across. As I said, there's many ways to do this, and maybe this isn't how I always do it, but if you are just starting out in shaping and you want to nail down something like a skinny long tube, which can be challenging, this is one way. It reminds me of how we roll out metal clay using playing cards. If you've ever done that, the playing cards kind of keep the depth of your roll equal, and in this case, those two end spacers keep the depth of this bead equal. And I'll just, to give you a demonstration, I'm going to create a high spot. So let's pretend I had a whole lot of glass there that I didn't want, this little bump. If I get that bump hot and roll it on my marver, these two end beads help that bump roll down into the plane of the tube. So probably more than you ever wanted to know about making a tube, but for this class where we're going through a host of shapes, bicones, hollows, tubes, barrels, and soon pendants, and even, I don't know what you call an egg shape, ovoid maybe? Well, we've got that here too. So we've got a lot of shapes. Okay, so I have mostly added enough glass is my estimation. And now the next trick for keeping this a tube. Yes, I want the whole thing to be warm. This is soda lime 104 glass. It will crack if I let it get too cool. I'm going to heat mostly on the right. I'm not super hot, and the reason I can say that is because white turns clear if it gets too hot. So I can judge that my white is hot, it's malleable, but it is not what I would call super hot because I can't see through it. And again, that right spacer bead is getting warm, but I'm not changing the shape on the right side of the bead. Now I will heat the left. There's a little distortion in the shape of this bead as I make it, but I want to get it pretty close to a finished tube if I can. Always remembering to keep both ends warm, but I'm now primarily working on the left side. Okay, so the left side is pretty hot. Now notice that end bead is still white here. So even though I have plenty of heat in the tube, the end bead is not going to change shape. And now I rolled it a little bit on my handheld marver. If you're watching a bead making experience for the first time, a marver is a heat-proof surface that we use to manipulate glass. And in this case, my marver is made of graphite, but marvers can be made of steel, aluminum, brass, probably stone, who knows? Anything that'll hold up to the heat. Certainly though, I've used aluminum and steel plenty of times. So I took my little rod of white and just gushed, to use that technical term, some white in where it needed to go in order to make my tube smoother. It's a demo. I'm not going to spend 25 minutes making a white tube, but in fact I spent 10, that should be enough. But because I like to give my beads to Beads of Courage, and I encourage you all, if you have rejects, to give them to Beads of Courage, my demos have gotten a lot more finished in recent years. This one's going to have metal in it, so they're not going to want it, I don't think. But nonetheless, it's become my practice to just get them more finished. I do hope sometimes they can sell them if they can't give them to children, and that way they can make money for their efforts. Okay, so I have a white tube, it's pretty good. All right, I have one spot I want to fix. You won't all yell later, oh, you wouldn't believe the tube she made. Okay, could happen. All right, white tube. Now, normally, my next step would be to sift on a heavy layer of white enamel. I'm not going to do that here because, as I said, we're not really prepared from a safety standpoint. I could be. Corning has everything I need, but it's just a quick demo, and the class is not going to get to this technique until later. So what I'm doing is I'm bringing up the heat base in the entire bead. None of it will be molten or soupy. It will all be what I could refer to as tacky hot. And it's tacky in the sense that when I roll it in enamel that I have right here, the enamel is sticking. And that's how I know the temperature of the glass. Think about if you're going to play with enamels, besides all the safety things I mentioned, you have to be mindful of the series of enamel that you're using so that you are using compatible enamel. This is a rule that gets broken, so it's hard for me to tell you it's an absolute rule, but I am using I think it is the 9000 series from, oh good, thank you, Ashley Ann. Yes, it is the 9000 series. This is opaque white, and it comes from Thompson Enamel. I'm not really familiar with other enamel manufacturers, but what I can tell you is that they also make a different series for other applications, such as for 90 glass or for using on copper. Could you fill a little bit more in there so I feel that I have more? And again, I want a thick layer, and at home I'd be sifting. So while I am waiting for more enamel, not a problem, I always have something to talk about. I am going to use copper leaf on this bead. Copper leaf is not very expensive, so it's a nice technique to be able to fool around with and not feel like you're investing huge sums of money. Unfortunately, the enamel's getting pricier and pricier, but the good news is you're just not using that much on a bead. So it goes a very long way. And copper leaf, sometimes if you've ever touched, usually people have experienced silver leaf, and the moment you touch it, it's stuck to you. It's stuck to your hands, your fingers, your clothes. It's just not. Right, gold is the same way, that's right. One of my students just said that. And of course, gold, you cry even more than you cry with silver. Copper, you don't have to cry that much. I find that I can handle copper leaf pretty easily if I don't have hand lotion on my hands. But if you are struggling with this, and I do find different people have just different moisture levels in their skin, different tendencies, you can take your fingers and wherever your graphite marker is, up here, down there, just wipe 2 fingers that you're going to use. 2 wipes maybe, they get a little yucky, right? You've got graphite on there. Now it's no problem. Now you can handle a leaf. So that is a great tip, and I didn't invent it. I'm always certain that somebody told me that. So what I want now, you all should experiment with rolling up very pristine square pieces of leaf or triangles, but I really like down here an irregular layer of leaf. I've just rolled this hot enameled bead in the leaf, and before I get too close to the flame again, I will try to burnish it on a little, but the truth is, it's gotten ashy, and that's what copper does. You know, silver, we've used in this class already. I would normally be rubbing. I find that I can't rub with the copper, and it doesn't need it. Because now what's going to happen is it's going to melt down into the enamel, and it's going to react with the enamel, and it will give us this lovely color that I call verdigris, but you know, copper green blue, call it what you like, Statue of Liberty green. What I will say is, where you double the copper, you might get different colors. You have a question? I'm sorry, I thought you had a question, Bonnie. You're probably like scratching your nose, but.
I have a question.
Okay, yes.
So the question is, why when you're putting it in and you're getting you're getting the black or you're getting the tarnish, why is it not falling off? Because if you're using, if you're enameling, you go in and the layer would just flake off?
Right. I'll tell you why. Because enamel has a slightly lower melting point than the glass, and it's tacky. So it's literally causing, that's a great question, it's causing the copper to stick to it. And if it does start to flake off, you can pick up the flakes and slam them back. Yeah, that you can do. Okay. But it does stay on. I will also say, you might initially think, I don't know if the camera can see this, but you might think I'm done here. You know, this is a very interesting color reaction. But where I have a little bit more black veining that I might like for aesthetic reasons, you can just concentrate your heat. Can you see that the surface of it is boiling, literally? And that is your enamel boiling, and it is boiling through the copper and reacting with it at the same time. So now, this area where I haven't really let the flame go yet, because I wanted to show it to you a second time, all of this sort of black sooty, I mean, I can't tell you how many students come to me and say, oh, I've used copper, but it just turns black. And the answer is, do more. Now, heat more, let the enamel boil more, and then if you still don't get either the green effect you want or a pleasant effect, and again, I'm just going around now and finding places to boil. I also want to keep my shape. You can put enamel on top of the copper, and it will react that way as well. So, I don't have my sifter, but here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to pick a spot right there, sort of mid-bead, because it's good for a demo. And it's pretty hot now. I see it boiling. I'm going to touch that. Well, it's sort of sticking everywhere, but I'm adding more enamel. I think you can see. But now I can literally get more disruption, more boiling, and frankly, one of the reasons I like this technique is because the sky's the limit. You want to add more enamels. Now somebody's going to ask me, why are you using white? Aha. This effect does seem to be most prominent with white enamel. Some people out there do it with just white glass, and they get the white glass to interact. I don't have a lot of good luck with that, but what the heck, try it, right? I also do this with other light colored enamels, in particular a very light green, a very light yellow. I find they react. They may not react exactly the same, but that's the whole idea, isn't it? To change colors, you get a color shift from the enamel. So what you're seeing is differences in where I doubled it, right? Here I had extra copper, I had less copper here, there's a spot with no copper. And so all of these things kind of give you that variegation. I do think right here, my end may have gotten a little thick. I'm gonna roll it out. Okay, so now, as I said, this is just a little tribute to John Winters, who's a really good bead maker. You can look him up online. He did a lot of work with chemical iridizing on the surface of beads, and he like me, really liked to disrupt the surface of the glass, and we had that in common. So you can also see on this demo that there's these, let's see if I can hold the bead, sorry, black lines, right? See the black lines dancing around? And by the way, this will come closer to this color, but maybe not exactly. Flame chemistry affects it, like there's a lot of variables. Enjoy those. Yes?
Could you put copper on top of that to get it deeper?
Yes, you can put more copper, and not only will it get deeper, you may need to put more white also, but where you layer copper, you can get clearly a different pattern, so that, let's say I took a little triangle of copper and put it right there, you would see an outline. Yeah, it's a little hard to do because of what JJ was commenting on. Of course, I think I just heard a crack, so I'm gonna heal it because I talked too much and my demos crack, I'm sorry. But what JJ was commenting on about the ashiness of the copper as you apply it. So if you're going to try to apply specific shapes that you wish would then stay that shape, start small, I think, because if I had a little triangle here and rolled it up carefully, I probably could get it to stick, but a big triangle, you know, while I'm fixing it here, it's burning there, and I don't know how easy it would be.
You would put it on top. You wouldn't put it
I tend to put it on top of the enamel first.
Oh, you would put it on, now you would put more enamel down.
Now I wouldn't worry about it so much. The enamel has disrupted the copper enough that this will be a tacky surface for applying more enamel. Okay. Go ahead.
A question. So, have you experimented where you've used the difference between a transparent color over that versus a transparent enamel?
No, that would be really cool. Do that. The transparent enamels are a whole different beast, but they're really fun.
I have some Japanese enamels.
Oops. That are compatible?
I don't know. They're compatible.
So back on the compatibility subject, I took a class at one point where the teacher just grabbed up some enamels that were in the studio, and they technically weren't compatible. They were enameling enamels for enameling on metal. Frankly, it worked. And the beads didn't crack. I still have them, so years ago. So, you know, but again, let's remember the general rule is let's try to be compatible. So now another thing that John Winters loved to do, and I'm not as good as he is, but I'll show you how to do it. It's called threading. And so what you're doing when you're threading on glass is, in my experience, to put a pretty thin trail of whatever color you're experimenting with. I am getting a black gather. Now this isn't intense black. Intense black is stiffer, so it's a little harder with intense black, but this is just regular old Epitre black. I'm getting my gather pretty soupy. But then, as I showed you before, when I want things to be a little stiff, I'm just heating the tip of the gather. So I'm going to attach this gather. Sorry, I forgot to do this part. I'm going to attach the gather to a hot spot on the mandrel. That will be wasted. It won't be part of my bead, right? But then, whoop, didn't quite stick. Okay, but now I think you can see that I'm threading on the black glass. Thanks, guys. That whole ooh of appreciation. Yeah, there'll be a little something extra in your check. I really appreciate that. So I'm making sure now that the threading is in fact actually attached, not just resting on the surface. I'm sure you've all had that experience where something shocks off. Ashley, did you have something to add to that?
It's very similar to a hot shop technique, yes.
Yes, very similar to Hot Shop, and John Winters worked in the Hot Shop, so it wouldn't surprise me if, he took it from there. Could I add more? Yeah, I'll try to add it one more time because I like to live dangerously, and then we'll put this in the kiln because I have something else I want to show you. Okay. Got my bead warm enough to receive it, right? Because it's got to stick or I'm going to have a problem. Getting my gather soupy. I sort of like it down at one end of the bead, so I'm probably not going to go all the way up to, we'll see. We'll see where it goes. And then of course I'm preheating a spot that it's going to stick to on the bead release, touching down, pulling it thin. And if you're fast, man, you can do a lot. I'm not as fast as I should be. Depends on how quickly you can revolve the bead in your left hand or in a hand. And as you know, I'm struggling with my fingers in that hand, so not very fast. But very nice. I mean, I love the effect. I love the black. It does stay on. You can melt it all the way in, or you can leave it ever so slightly in relief. It also has the advantage of sticking because of the enamel, right? So here in the sample, you can see I did some yellow. And all of it, I think, is a very lovely accent. So there's my bead. Did you get that? Yep. All right. I'm going to give you a quick glimpse here, and you'll see it better when it comes out of the kiln, of course. But it's cool. And I have done this effect very successfully on hollows. Now, here's the problem with a hollow bead. We're going to get right to it. Hold on. I'm going to make a hollow bead now, and I'm going to do it on a puffy mandrel. And no, I am not going to put on copper leaf and all that. You're just going to have to believe me. I'm going to use one of my favorite colors. This is a very thick rod. Could you possibly get me a thinner rod of pale amethyst? Thank you. Okay, this is a puffy mandrel. This is something that my husband used to manufacture and sell, but is now available widely. It was developed in Israel by Amnon Elbaz, and it does come from furnace experience, I believe. It's something that's been used at a furnace. It's a tube. It has a side blowhole right there. That's why sometimes you hear them called side hole mandrels. Pardon me. And what I'm going to do is create a hollow bead in a more or less traditional manner. But then after I finish the bead, everything going right in my life, and if the stars have aligned, I'll be able to blow into the tube like this, and it will help the bead round and inflate. This one is. Thank you very much. That's much better. Now, this is a rod that's been melted a little bit before because it came out of our stash over there. And what I'm going to do is what I always do, and you may have seen me do. I'm going to, as I've said before, pinch off the end. Usually, if nothing else, there's bubbles, but sometimes there's scum, whatever. And if I really was making a bead that I wanted to have made into jewelry or a necklace or something, I would certainly be washing these down with alcohol wipes of some sort. But again, it's a demo. And now another bead that Beads of Courage doesn't love because they're not big on hollows either. They're worried about fragility. I don't find hollows to be fragile, but I understand their concerns. They're giving them to kids. Now, remember in the class that yesterday we did, 2 days ago rather, we did discs. Don't drink coffee before the live stream because your hands will shake. But if I didn't have coffee, I'd probably doze off during the live stream. So when we did discs yesterday, first we did solo discs. So this would be the beginning of a disc. When we then move to hollows, I encourage you to set the footprint of your hollow. Hopefully this isn't going to be too huge. For a couple of reasons. One, hollows tend to get huge, so let's set the footprint and decide that we're not going to go any bigger. And two, this one needs a little glass, it's a little anemic. The other thing is, though, I like that first wrap of glass to be a substantial, well-attached foundation for your hollow. It has to be well adhered to the bead release so that you don't have air leaking out in the holes. And the truth is, I even, when I make hollows, start with a little bit of a wider wrap than I might be making my disc, all right? Now, when you make discs the traditional way, as we did yesterday, you do want to be sure to keep your discs thin. But we're not working the traditional way, and these discs, should they start to collapse when you finish up your hollow bead and oh, your walls are too thick and now the bead isn't going to be hollow, we don't have that problem with a puffy mandrel, because the puffy mandrel is going to enable us to introduce some air into the interior of the bead. And the bead will expand, but not as much as people think. People expect like it's going to become a Christmas ornament. That's not going to happen. It's going to become about a third at most larger than when it started. Now, of course, a small hollow bead grows perhaps a quarter. A huge hollow bead might grow even 50%, because as you add more glass to the equation, you have the potential for more growth. So what I'm doing, maybe not my best, but you know, if you guys would all turn around and not watch, this would go better. I'm making discs. The discs are opposite each other. And by the way, you want to see discs, go watch Christina Logan's YouTube video, just killer on discs. Go ahead. Did I?
Question I had, sorry, is
That's
you were
okay.
saying that you were making these discs thicker or thinner than yesterday?
The same, but if they're thick, it's not a problem. In other words, some people just are like worried that they've made their discs too heavy. Don't worry about that with a puffy mandrel. You also don't really have to worry much about symmetry between your discs. It's all going to come out in the wash. What I did just then was I brought the right hand disc slightly towards the left hand disc, speaking of my hands, of course, so that they will eventually cup toward each other. Many people say to me, well, mine don't meet in the middle, so I'm trying to do it so they don't meet in the middle, and then you can see that that is not a problem. But let's see if I can do that on purpose. I don't know. So what I'm doing is I'm just building the discs. Now, again, as we talked about when we were troubleshooting, I don't have anything to show you, but if you have a spot that starts to collapse or fall down, you got it too hot, just touch it with your rod and pull it out, and it will straighten up. Another troubleshooting tip is look at how I'm heating my discs. They will not collapse because I am not heating the edges. I'm not doing this, right? I'm doing this. And we call that, we, meaning me, maybe my children, we call that heating the face of the disc. And the reason we're heating the face of the disc and not the edge of the disc is we don't want it to fatten up and slump into a round bead. We want to just keep those discs happy. I asked you this last time, who has had the experience of doing this, and then you go back into the flame with your disc and boom, it blows apart. When that happens, one of the main reasons, and what you're seeing me do, I'll go back to that, but what you're seeing me do is just curve this disc on the right a little over to the left, just so I can have them meet eventually. When they blow apart like that, think about your heat base. You need to rotate the edge of the disc in the heat and then apply hot glass to it like I'm doing now. If you haven't rotated the edge of the disc, if there's no heat in that disc, it's cold, you're applying molten glass, your heat base, meaning the base in each of those two pieces, is too different. You've got hot and cold coming together, and sure enough, they don't stick very well. You had this experience when you were applying Murini in our earlier demo. Some of you put your Murini in and it popped right out again. And I question how long you had it sitting on your bench and how cold it had gotten before you tried to apply it. Because if it's cold and your bead is hot, it will just come right out. It doesn't cooperate. Same thing here. If you have your discs blowing apart regularly, you're probably applying either cold glass to hot or hot glass to cold, but somehow you don't have close enough to equal heat base in the two. Now, okay, I tried to get it, it's sort of almost centered, but really I was trying to get it off center. Can you see that the gap between the two discs? Okay. If I'm going to fill it in with one more roll of glass and then maybe a half a stripe where the gap is a little wide. If you have holes in your discs, this happens, I call it, sometimes people are doing inchworms when they put on wraps of glass. They go eek, 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 eek. And those little eeks make for little gaps. If you have those little gaps, instead of plugging glass into them, let me show you what I think is more successful. Because when you just dab glass all over the place, now instead of having a hollow with equal walls and optically all one color and thickness, right? Because the thick glass looks different than the thin glass, right? The end of the rod looks aqua, but this side looks pale. So you know that thickness can affect your color. If you have a spot, I'm not seeing one, but we'll pretend. If you have a spot where you've got a hole, take a tool such as a knife, heat the spot next to the hole, and move the glass over with the tiniest little touch. That's all you need to do. If you have a place, let's pretend this is collapsing right there, because collapsing can happen just like in a regular hollow bead, even with a puffy mandrel. So you heat the spot that's collapsing. Just get some heat in it. Take your warm rod, touch the collapsing spot, wait a sec, and then just pull, right? So now, and then I can burn off the rod, but you can see that I've pulled it away from the mandrel. If I keep waving this in the air, it's gonna have a problem. Okay, so now let's talk about the differences with a puffy mandrel. First of all, there's air in the bead, there's a hole in the middle of the bead, and this is a tube. So if I just heat this now, it'll be a solid bead with no air. The reason being, it'll squeeze itself down and it'll push its air out the bead, out the tube. So what I'm going to do instead is, I've moved my hands to the right. I'm going to need a drink of water, sorry. Cover the hole, very important. Now, I'm going to heat this whole bead. Basically, I showed you yesterday, my habit is to heat the ends and get them smooth, the sides, where they meet the bead release. One of the reasons is you want your bead release hot. If you find that your beads are collapsing around the holes, try a slightly wider wrap of glass on a hot mandrel. You weren't well attached to your bead release is usually the reason. Okay. So I'm going to heat this until it's smooth. It's going to look like your basic hollow bead. It will collapse a little bit, but I don't think I have any holes, so I think we're cool. One of the ways to test for holes, you're going to love this, before you finish rounding it up, I may have a hole somewhere, but I don't see it. What I was doing was feeling for hot air. So the interesting thing is, even if I have a little pinhole somewhere, this process of melting this down, trust me, it'll close the pinhole. This is not going to collapse at this point. So you don't have to panic. If your bead is collapsing, come out of the flame and do one of the fixes. Move some glass onto a hole or grab it with a hot rod or whatever fix you deem is needed. Remember, if it's collapsing down onto the mandrel, gravity's your friend. Heat that spot and put the collapsing spot down toward the table so that it can move away. I just saw somebody nod their head. You've had this experience. Okay, so what I'm going to do is finish heating this. And then I'm going to blow. I usually lick my lips. I'm going to remember to keep rotating as I blow because I want the air to move in the bead and I want the bead to stay symmetrical. So I'm going to be rotating to keep it on center. I'm going to be looking down my mandrel so that I can tell where it center is. And notice that I'm not heating one area. I'm heating the whole thing because I need an even heat base for it to expand. I'll try to get it to expand a noticeable amount because really, as I said, it's like a third. But I think I can make it look a little bit impressive. I'll point at it as it starts to go because I can't talk and blow at the same time. I'm working on it. This is where I miss my husband. He's usually the one who points while I'm blowing. Okay, here we go. All right, so you saw expansion there, I hope. Now, somebody said to me that their hollows frequently pop. If you make them too thin and go back into the flame, they'll pop. And I made this one pretty thin because I wanted you to see the impact. Now, I want to just stay with this for a second though. If I wanted to put enamel on this and I wanted to put copper leaf, or I wanted to dot it and I wanted the dots melted in or threaded, the problem is as you get it hot, it starts to shrink a little bit, right? Because the bead is not as thick as a solid bead. But the advantage is either by keeping my finger over the back or by puffing it up again when it starts to contract. This gives you a lot of design options that I find are very difficult in normal hollow beads. The other thing is if you can't keep your finger back there, try a piece of polymer clay or sometimes, what do you call that putty, like glazing putty they use for windows? That works too. Okay. So we have about 15 minutes. I do have one more thing I would like to show you. I never stop talking, I think you'll agree. But I do want to stop for a minute and talk about sandblasting briefly, and then I'm going to show you one bead that I have in my body of work that people tend to ask me about. Okay, so over here in this tray, here's what we're looking at. This is a finished bead. I think it probably shows better if I lift it up. Now the interesting thing about this style of bead, here's one that hasn't been sandblasted yet. The interesting thing here is the way this aquamarine, my favorite color, transmits to the edges of the glass. There is no aquamarine wrap on these beads. Just like this green one, there's no green wrap around the edge, but it's an illusion, it's color transmitted through clear. And so I make these beads, then I take vinyl, I've imported my designs into my vinyl cutter and I'm cutting vinyl. We'll talk about that when we get to the PowerPoint on sandblasting. And I take the little pieces of cut vinyl, it's called a mask, and they are pressed onto a bead, okay? That's what this is. The pieces of black vinyl on this bead. Then I take this to the sandblaster, or my TA does, and she sandblasts it, and everywhere that there is no black vinyl etches. The black vinyl is called a resist because it resists the abrasive, it keeps it off. And so you end up with this design after you wash off the black vinyl and the abrasive. So this is an example of what we call tone-on-tone sandblasting. This is a finished bead I did yesterday. I'm gonna just start one for you because the part that I want you to see, I'm coming back, the part that I want you to see is pretty early on. What I want to tell you though is these beads, something that says words like this one I did for Beads of Courage, and it has a design of beads. This is not tone on tone. This has an extra layer of enamel on the surface. Similarly, here's a bead that's got a white enamel on it. I put resist on it that has, in this case, some words. And then when I sandblast it off and wash off the resist, I'll have white letters because I will have the remaining white enamel. So everybody understand that? In this case, on a red bead, this one says own who you are, which I think is a good thing. And this Hamsa bead is done with a similar technique. Sandblasting is a world unto itself. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start making this disc bead and tell you why I want to show it to you. The reason I want to show it is because there's one more trick in this bead that isn't apparent but is actually pretty important. I make the clear go over the color. So even though you might be seeing a ring, in that case, of purple and then a lot of clear, what your eye doesn't know is that there is transparent glass, and if you could get me, no, just some reasonable clear. It doesn't have to be fat, it could be anything. I just like, 5, 6, yeah, that would probably work. Thank you, Ashley Ann. I forgot about needing that. I think this blue will be fun. Thank you. So the reason you need the clear to go down over the color is when you sandblast, it intensifies what you're blasting on. If you blast on light aqua, it becomes a darker aqua. And then the illusion of the color traveling wouldn't work. The sandblasting fools your eye. You think I'm blasting on that intense color in the center, but I'm not. I'm blasting into clear everywhere. So knowing how to get the encasing to drop down onto the sides of this piece is fairly important, and I'm just going to do a little disc to show you how I do that. When we encase larger beads that we're going to be doing, such as a big galaxy bead, it's going to be important to have seen this, and you'll get to see it more than once. So what I'm doing first is I'm creating a base bead of color on a tube. The tube is, I don't know how fat. It's a blowpipe. What is it? Maybe 5/8?
5.
Say it again?
5.
5 millimeter?
Well, but then you have.
Yeah, I think it's probably closer to 6, but yeah, 5, 6. That makes sense to me. And I'm using it because this particular bead roller that I'm using is cut out for a larger mandrel. So you can see that. And my bead release is cracking, which I'm going to ignore, but we've had a little trouble in class this week. We're not really sure why the bead release is giving us grief because it's a very good bead release, but it's either too thin or too watery or too something, I don't know. So anyway, so all I'm doing is making a base bead while trying to repair the crack in the bead release. Now, if you have a crack and it travels all the way out to the end, either give up on the bead because eventually it'll start spinning loose, or if it's a bead you really feel the need to preserve, you can actually wrap some scrap glass around the crack and hope that that keeps it from spreading. And I think I did it once yesterday and it worked, so.
Did you have to make sure that you keep on keeping that hot though, so it doesn't
No,
fall off?
actually the opposite. You don't really take your flame back to that wrap where you've tried to repair the glass. You hope that maybe it's a little stuck to the steel underneath. It's really a, what do they call it, a Hail Mary pass kind of thing. It's just an effort. And by the way, I see online people saying don't switch hands. I tell you to do what works. My left hand is hurting me, so I'm going with my right hand. And what I'm doing is I'm building up a little core of the aquamarine, and I'm going to start making the disc that's going to go into the smallest cavity. The truth is, I do them sequentially. I make them in the small cavity, then I make it into the middle cavity, then I build them from the smallest spot. Okay, that's good. And the reason I do that is because I don't want the bead to spread any wider than these cavities, because that's the illusion that I like when I make these sandblasted beads. Eventually, when we stop, you guys can all hold them. Now remember, because I'm going around a larger surface now, I need a bigger gather, and if I'm running low on my gather, I can just slow down with my wrap of glass and let my flame do the work of melting more. And I won't tell you I'm some sort of expert at that, it's just something you get used to doing. So here is what's going to be the core of this bead. That's about how much color is in each of those beads. I'm going to get it to be pretty symmetrical. I picked up the wrong marver. And it fits nicely in here. This is a CG bead roller, and on our materials list, I'm not positive if it's there, but I will add it, of course, because I love this. It's a very good bead roller. And what I like about it is, if you're making jewelry or components for jewelry, sometimes if you're not using calipers, something like this mold will help you make things equivalent sizes. Now, this is a nice fat rod of clear. So this is the part where, well, things can get out of hand, but we'll find out. First, I'm going to just add some clear around the center of the bead. No big deal. We've done this on discs, so we'll keep going. But I wanted to do this bead and this sandblasting because it's a tribute to another bead artist who isn't with us anymore, and that's Diana East. And many of you probably don't know her work. She lived in the UK, she passed away a while ago. There is a very good book about her by James Curvin, and she taught me my first sandblasting class, and I was hooked. Just the way you get hooked on glass, I got hooked on sandblasting. So, and I loved her, and she was a wonderful woman, and she could eat a whole stick of butter at a meal. She just was just a character and wonderful. So, again, we have to remember where we've been to figure out where we're going, and Diana East gave me a lovely foundation. So, do not tug. If you're running out of clear as you go around, remember, let your torch make more. And because I'm using this tool, I know that I can add more and then just kind of squish it down. We'll be good on time, I think. So this wrap is doing nothing but making the disc taller, right? It is not doing anything to get the clear to go down around the sides. So I don't really want to melt it flush yet. Because you know what happens if you melt it flush. If you melt it flush, you're going to have a line between what you've melted down and what you've added. Now, it's gone off a little to one side. I don't know, maybe I'm tired, whatever. I will fix it just by heating that outer wrapper of glass and kind of straightening it up. See, if you weren't here, you wouldn't even know I did that. But the idea is for me to show you how to fix your problems. And if that outer wrap has wandered over, those of us with astigmatism or whatever, that's what happens. Now, you can already see that the aqua is reflecting through the outer layers, or at least I can. But before I melt this down, I'm gonna do, sorry, but that was very cracked. I'm gonna do what I call a turtleneck. It's a little more obvious on a tube bead, but it'll be pretty obvious here too. I am going to do a wrap of clear. If you can't see what I'm doing, come behind me or whatever you need to do. I'm going to do a wrap of clear up against the disc that is going to extend beyond the bead. So if you were to look at this wrap and look through it, it's above the mandrel, not above the bead, because I've moved out to the right, in this case,
So it's like
of the bead.
towards this, on the top.
It's a coil toward the side, exactly.
On both sides or just?
It's going to
one?
be on both sides.
And that's a clear.
This is clear.
And it's a.
See the coffee making my hands? It is, but none of that's important. I could use any clear. I'm just touching the side of the disc and I am wrapping on a coil of glass. I don't really have a big enough gather because this rod is fat and I didn't get it hot enough, but I'll finish it in a moment. And the goal is for that extra wrap, which is usually when I'm making the big version of this, because I'm doing like a mini one. But when I do this, the turtleneck that I just added, a wrap on each side, I'd add 2. Because I need more if it's taller discs. Everybody understand that? Okay. So how do you get that turtleneck to help you? Now I'm going to do a second one, I'm sorry. You want the turtleneck to fall down almost to the mandrel. So think about the distance it has to traverse. It has to go from where it is now down to almost to the mandrel to cover that core. I only have about 5 more minutes that I need to do. I'm almost done. I don't want you to worry, Mr. Cameraman. I want that clear, that collar of clear that I'm creating, to be enough glass that it's going to go almost down to the hole, because I want to cover, there you go, nice juicy wrap of clear on that side. And now I'm going to do one on the other side, and then I'm going to heat it. So what I want you to be mindful of is I could do this on a bead that was as long as that first bead I made today. I could do it on any of the cylinders that I showed you in class on the first day where we were using the ivory. So there's this method of adding glass off the footprint of the bead, essentially, right? I'm not quite all the way around, sorry. Works just fine. Now, first, I'm going to show you how I'm going to finish it and get that clear down to the hole. Just want to finish this wrap. Okay, so now if you were standing where I'm standing or sitting, you would see that I'm over the bead. The bead's here and I'm over it in each of these wraps. It is a tire. I call it a turtleneck, but call it what you will. Funnel, has a lot of names. Okay, so now first I'm heating the center. This is exactly what I would do even with a tube bead. Nothing changes. I'm heating straight ahead. I want to get that smooth. Yes, the sides get a little hot and they start to move down, but that's okay. They're going to go where I want them to go. Damn, I'm just going to make them go. Seriously, you guys are very patient, but I hope that when we do this on a tube bead, you will really start to see that this is a way to get that encasing down to the hole and not have the core bead, the colored bead, crawl up the way it sometimes does. Especially green loves to, dear God, green loves to come up on you, doesn't it? Okay, so after I get the center pretty smooth, right? I've gone around enough, I can feel it collapsing. I'm being careful not to tip it. I'm holding it totally parallel to the table. That's important. I will start heating one wrap. So look where I've moved my heat. Your torch is a tool. I've moved the heat to the left and a little bit of an angle. See my hand is angled? That's going to cause that wrap to start to fall down. And I will now let that settle down and do the opposite end, just because this is a narrow bead. So when I'm heating the left, the right is getting heat. I want to get the whole thing warm. And then in this particular tool, I can find the cavity. I'll start here. Yep, not a problem. Nothing's happening when I put it in that cavity. That tells me I can go smaller. Just pinching it. Just pinching it. Again, I can see my clear. It's a little hard to see, I suspect, clear on clear, but I can see my clear falling down over the aqua. And over here, I can the left side is a little more obvious to me that the clear is falling down. And probably I'm gonna end up in here. Yeah, that's what I think. So gently, guys. You see me dancing almost in and out? I'll exaggerate it. I'm doing this with tiny rolls. And the reason for that is I don't want to distort, I don't want to force. And remember in the past I've said things about using a wipe on your marver, not a press, to change the surface shape. I'm really doing the same thing with the cavities here. I'm not really pressing. It's not like I need to alter things. I am gently rolling in there. Now it is rolling totally freely. In the real world, I would be making this larger and larger, you know, if this wasn't a demo. So I probably won't finish every roll, but what I want to show you is these marvers leave chill marks behind just like any cold tool or handheld marver or press. And so when you reach the point, I'm not there yet, but I will be. When you reach the point that the bead is essentially, let's say, finished, you know, you like it, it's good, it's come together, it's symmetrical, and the marver helps with all that stuff. It helps with symmetry, you know, you can certainly see this one really needs to be this size, and I'm not going to stop to do it, but that's okay. What I want you to do is remember on every bead you make where you are forming it, and this is a common problem, you have to take a moment or more to flame polish all of the surfaces that have come in contact with the marver. And by flame polish, I mean put enough heat on the surface that the rings or the chill marks that are created fall down onto the bead and become, you know, merged with the bead and not apparent. I think that what people want to do when they want to get the chill marks out of this is they do this. And all that does is collapse your bead. You need the surface to get heated. And I apologize because I'm not going to finish this all the way up to its giant size. So it's sort of fitting in the cavity, but it's got room to spare. I would normally add more clear, but in any event, again, I just went in the cavity. I got to take a second and get rid of the marks, because especially with sandblasting, and especially tone on tone sandblasting, where you're just taking a clear or light colored surface and blasting into it, those chill marks will mar the effect. The very reason that we use this beautiful clear, you know, is because we like that reflective effect. Doesn't work if you don't get the chill marks out. Okay, so there is a very small finished version. It's like about 2/3 my normal size of this disc, and the clear goes all the way down on the sides, because I would see the aqua would glow differently in the flame if I had the aqua exposed, so I can tell. And so then, you know, when this comes out, I know it looks like a clear bead, but there's aqua in the core, and so you get this same nice effect. There are lots of shapes you can do that will give this to you, and I want you to think about that.
The green one, you only used a really transparent green, or you had
Yeah.
a green core?
No, just that transparent green.
And over
In the
over it
core, and over it is clear. I know, it's an illusion. It's a wonderful illusion. So I'll remind you, this sandblasted bead, be kind, right? Important to me and to Beads of Courage. And I'll thank you for sitting still, paying attention, asking good questions, coming to Corning, and working hard. This is such a hard-working group of students. I love you all. Thank you. Thank you for watching.